What happens in those moments between life and death? For many, it's darkness. For others, it's a tunnel of light. But for some, it's something much deeper, more emotional, and far more mysterious. Some people return from the edge of death, not just with peace or visions of heaven, but with reunions. Reunions with people they thought they'd never see again. Today, we'll be sharing 10 deeply moving near-death experiences from real people who claim to have seen or even spoken with their mothers, long after they had passed away. These aren't just stories. These are memories that linger in their hearts, and the hearts of the hospice nurses and doctors who witnessed them. Some of these accounts were whispered in ICU rooms, others shared quietly during hospice care, but all of them will leave you with chills. Story 1. The Woman in the Yellow Dress. Lori James was 53 years old, a mother of 2 daughters, a wife of 25 years, and a well-loved school librarian in North Carolina. She was, by most accounts, healthy and full of life. But during what was supposed to be a routine laparoscopic surgery for gallbladder removal, something went terribly wrong. While under general anesthesia, Lori's heart unexpectedly went into cardiac arrest. The surgical team immediately began CPR and called for a crash cart. For almost 5 minutes, Lori was clinically dead, flatlined, no pulse, no heartbeat. But while doctors and nurses worked feverishly to bring her back, Lori was somewhere else entirely. She later described what she experienced as a kind of awakening into a memory that felt more real than life itself. She said she found herself standing in the middle of a vast, glowing field, a golden meadow with tall grass swaying gently in the breeze. The sky was soft and warm, not like any sky she'd seen on Earth. There was a stillness that filled her body with peace. No pain, no fear, just a profound calm. In the distance, she saw a figure walking toward her. At first, she couldn't make it out clearly, but as the figure got closer, Lori said her heart knew before her eyes confirmed it. It was her mother. Her mother had passed away over 20 years earlier from breast cancer. Lori remembered holding her hand as she took her last breath. But here she was again, vibrant, young-looking, and wearing a yellow sundress Lori hadn't seen since she was a child. It was a dress from an old family photo, one Lori had clung to after her mother's passing. Lori's mother reached out and gently touched her hand. Lori described that touch as more than touch. It was like every loving memory I'd ever had wrapped into that one moment. And then, with a soft voice full of love and command, her mother spoke. "It's not time yet, baby. Go back. Your girls need you." Lori said the words didn't feel like rejection. They felt like a mission, a gentle but firm calling back to life. In the blink of an eye, the meadow faded, and Lori woke up to bright hospital lights, gasping for air and sobbing uncontrollably. But it wasn't fear. She was weeping with joy. A nurse who had been in the room when Lori came to later shared her own side of the story. "In my 18 years of nursing, I've seen people come back from cardiac arrest terrified, confused, sometimes angry. But Lori, she was different. She came back with tears running down her face and the most peaceful look I've ever seen. She wasn't scared. She looked grateful." In the days that followed, Lori recovered quickly. But something in her had changed. She no longer feared death. She became more open, more loving, more present with her daughters. She started volunteering at a local hospice center, sitting with patients in their final hours. Lori says, "I used to wonder if death was the end. Now I know it isn't. And I know one day when my real time comes, she'll be waiting for me again, in that yellow dress." Story 2. She Sat by My Bed. Marcus Hayes was an 82-year-old Vietnam War veteran, tough, proud, and quiet. He'd lived a full life, but the end had come slowly and painfully through advanced lung cancer. In his final weeks, he was moved to a small hospice facility just outside Austin, Texas. For the first few days, Marcus was alert, cracking dry jokes with the nurses, nodding silently as his adult children sat with him and played old country music. But then, as often happens in the final stages of life, his body began to slow. He slipped into unconsciousness, and the medical staff gently told his family, "It won't be long now." 2 days passed. Marcus didn't move. He didn't speak. His breathing was shallow and slow. His daughter, Anne, stayed by his side the whole time, holding his hand and whispering old family memories into his ear. And then, on the 3rd morning, just after sunrise, something happened. Anne, who had been dozing in the corner of the room, was startled awake by the soft sound of her father's voice. She looked up, and Marcus's eyes were open. He was staring at the ceiling with the gentlest expression on his face. Then, without looking at anyone, he said in a whisper so soft it was barely audible, "Mama sat by my bed last night. She stroked my hair. Just like when I had those fevers back in '42. Anne froze. Her grandfather had passed away in the early 70s, and her grandmother, Marcus's mother, had died in 1981. She'd never heard him speak of her in years. But now, in his final moments, it was as if time folded in on itself. Marcus didn't say anything else. He simply closed his eyes. And just minutes later, he took one last soft breath and passed. But the room didn't feel heavy. It didn't feel broken. Anne described it later as a sacred stillness, like the veil between this world and the next had thinned for just a moment, and something holy had entered the room. One of the hospice nurses who had been caring for Marcus throughout his stay, a woman named Claire with over 11 years of experience, later shared her perspective. "We see a lot of things in hospice. People talking to loved ones, seeing things we can't. Sometimes it's confusion, yes, but this was something else." He wasn't confused. His voice had peace in it. He was calm, clear, and full of love. It wasn't a hallucination. It was like he had been given a gift right before the end. And Anne agrees. "That moment, it erased all fear I had of death. My father died smiling, and I believe with everything in me that his mama really was there. Just like she was when he was a boy, to guide him home." Story 3. She was waiting at the gate. Eva Santiago was 29 years old when she died. At least, for nearly 6 minutes, she wasn't breathing. It happened on what was supposed to be a peaceful weekend kayaking trip with friends along the Deschutes River in Oregon. A sudden drop in the current overturned Eva's kayak. She wasn't wearing a life jacket. Her foot became lodged under a submerged log, and the river's current kept her trapped. By the time her friends pulled her out and medics arrived, Eva had no pulse. CPR was started immediately, and after multiple attempts, her heart miraculously began beating again. Paramedics called it a miracle revival. But what Eva experienced during those 6 silent minutes was something that changed her life and spirit forever. Eva describes the experience with reverence and awe. It wasn't darkness. It was like being carried upward in warmth and sound, like music without instruments. The light wasn't harsh, but radiant, like it came from everything around me. She says she felt no fear, just weightlessness and a strange sense of recognition, as if she were returning to something she had once known deeply, but long forgotten. That's when she saw it. A large, glowing archway, ancient yet perfect. She describes it as not built from stone or metal, but something more alive, energy and light. And standing just outside of it was her mother. Eva's mom had passed away from breast cancer 5 years earlier, a long and painful journey that had left deep wounds in Eva's heart. She had held her mother's hand at the end, whispering promises to live boldly, to be strong, even when she felt anything but. But now, her mother wasn't weak or pale or trembling. She was radiant, strong, and young. Eva says her mother looked just as she did in old family photos from the 1980s, the ones she kept in a frame by her bed. She was smiling, arms open, but not pulling Eva in. Instead, she just stood by the gate, waiting. Then, with a voice that was somehow both inside her and all around her, her mother said, "I'm so proud of you, but the pain you've been carrying, it's not yours anymore. Let it go, baby. You're free." Eva says she fell to her knees, weeping in that space of light, not from sadness, but from release. All the guilt, the grief, the heavy loneliness she had carried for years seemed to melt away in her mother's words. And then, just as suddenly, the light began to fade, and Eva felt herself pulled backward, like being reeled back into her body. She woke up, coughing on the riverbank, her chest aching, the sound of sirens in the distance. But something inside her was different. Today, Eva speaks publicly about her near-death experience and volunteers at cancer support centers, helping daughters who have lost their mothers navigate grief and healing. No therapy, no book, no conversation ever healed me the way that moment did, she says. She was waiting at the gate, and I know, when my real time comes, she'll be there again. But until then, I live differently. I live free. Story 4. A Doctor's Witness. Some stories leave an impression not just on the patients who experience them, but on the professionals who witness them firsthand. Dr. Harish Patel, a seasoned ER physician in New Jersey with over 20 years of emergency medicine under his belt, once shared a case that he said has stayed with him more than any textbook, any trauma, or any miracle he'd ever seen. It was an ordinary Friday night shift. Busy, chaotic, like most nights in the ER. But everything changed when a middle-aged man in his early 50s was rushed in by ambulance. He was in the middle of a massive heart attack. Vitals were unstable, and within moments of arrival, he coded. The heart monitor flatlined. The crash team moved instantly. Chest compressions, epinephrine, defibrillator shocks. For nearly 3 minutes, the man had no heartbeat. And then, suddenly, his heart started beating again. When the man finally opened his eyes, something strange happened. He wasn't confused. He wasn't panicking. He looked around the trauma room calmly, then turned his head slowly toward Dr. Patel and asked a quiet, almost curious question. Why was my mother in the room? Everyone in the ER stopped. There had been no visitors. No one besides the medical staff had entered. Dr. Patel assumed he meant a nurse or that it was a post-revival hallucination. But what the patient said next made the room go still. He described her in full detail, her light blue cardigan, her perfume, that same rosewater scent she always wore at church, and the sound of her voice. He said she sat by his bed, stroked his forehead like she used to when he was sick as a boy, and told him, "Don't worry, I've been with you this whole time." His mother had died 8 years earlier. Dr. Patel said later in an interview, "I've seen thousands of resuscitations. I've seen terror, confusion, anger, sobbing, but this man, he came back with a kind of peace I can't explain. He wasn't scared, he was comforted, like he had been reminded of something sacred." And it didn't stop there. The man went on to recover with surprising speed. When Dr. Patel checked in on him a day later, the man smiled and said, "She didn't come to take me, just to let me know she never really left." Dr. Patel now says that, although he's trained in science and medicine, he's learned to make space for the unexplainable. That case changed something in him. You can call it the brain's way of coping, but in that room, for those few seconds, it felt like more. Like something unseen had stepped in to remind us we're not alone, and maybe never were. Story 5, The Singing Voice. Some near-death experiences don't come in visions or light, but in sound, in something so familiar, so deeply personal, that it reaches beyond memory and straight into the soul. Claire was only 7 years old when she was rushed into emergency surgery after her appendix ruptured. She was in terrible pain, her fever dangerously high, and the infection had begun to spread. The doctors worked quickly, placing her under general anesthesia. But during that time, a time when her heart came dangerously close to stopping, something happened that no one expected. When Claire woke up in recovery, her eyes were glassy but calm. She looked at her father and softly asked, "Why was Mommy singing to me?" Her father froze. Claire had never known her mother. She had died during childbirth, giving birth to Claire. There were no recordings of her voice, no home videos, just fading photos and memories buried in Claire's father's heart. But now, his 7-year-old daughter was sitting up in bed, describing her mother's voice. Perfectly. She said it was soft and warm, with a gentle accent, the kind of melodic rhythm her mother had from growing up in the Irish countryside. She even sang the exact lullaby her mother used to hum while pregnant, a Gaelic melody that no one else in the family remembered. Claire had never heard it before. She described how, during the surgery, everything went dark, but instead of fear, she felt surrounded by warmth and music. She said the voice was right above her head, stroking her hair and humming. "Hush now, little one, I'm right here." The doctors were baffled. They chalked it up to anesthesia dreams or subconscious fragments. But her father knew. He sat by her hospital bed, tears in his eyes, and whispered, "There's no way you could have known that song. No way you could have described her voice. But I did, and I knew instantly that was your mom." Claire recovered fully from the surgery, but the experience stayed with her, shaping her understanding of life, loss, and connection. As she grew older, she became a music therapist, using sound and song to bring peace to others in hospitals, hospices, and trauma recovery centers. She says that moment at 7 years old taught her something that science couldn't explain. Love doesn't end, It doesn't even fade. It just waits, sometimes with a song, for the moment when we need it most. Story 6. She opened the door. Not every journey of the soul begins with bright lights or angelic voices. Some start in quiet, ordinary ways: a hallway, a door, the comforting face of someone long gone, but never forgotten. Luis Ramirez, a 66-year-old retired mechanic and proud father of 4, suffered a major stroke in the kitchen of his family's home in El Paso, Texas. His wife found him collapsed on the floor, unable to speak, barely breathing. He was rushed to the ICU, where doctors placed him in a medically induced coma. He remained unconscious for over 30 hours. When Luis finally opened his eyes, he wasn't confused. He wasn't scared. In fact, he had tears rolling down his face and a look of peace that no one in the room could explain. That's when he whispered to the nurse at his bedside, "I didn't die. I visited home." When his family came in, he began to share what he called his soul journey. Luis described finding himself in a long, quiet hallway, the kind of hallway that somehow felt familiar, like it belonged in a house he once knew but hadn't seen in decades. The walls were filled with doors, each one slightly different, each one humming with a gentle light behind it. He walked slowly, barefoot, without fear, just a sense of deep purpose, as if he knew he had to reach the final door. And when he did, the door opened before he even touched the handle. Standing there was his mother. He hadn't seen her since she passed away in 1998. But now she looked vibrant, glowing, full of life, just like she did when Luis was a small boy, coming home from school to the smell of fresh tortillas and the sound of old Spanish ballads on the radio. She opened her arms, Luis recalled, voice shaking, and said, "Mijo, it's not your time. But now you know I'm always waiting." He said it wasn't just a vision, it was real. He could feel the warmth of her hug, the texture of her apron, the scent of cinnamon and roses, just like when he was little. Luis says that experience changed everything. Before the stroke, he had been afraid of death. He rarely talked about his mother's passing, and he often felt haunted by the things left unsaid. But after that day in the ICU, he began to live differently, more open, more trusting in something beyond this world. That hallway, he said, wasn't the end. It was the reminder. We don't walk this life alone, and we don't leave it alone either. Now, Luis shares his story with anyone who needs hope, especially stroke survivors and families in hospice care. His message is simple. There are doors beyond this world, and sometimes, if we're lucky, they open just long enough to remind us, love never stops waiting. Story 7. Story 7. She touched my face. Anna's experience was one that defied all medical understanding and left her with a sense of peace and comfort that would change her life forever. At the age of 34, Anna was giving birth to her second child when complications arose. She suffered from severe internal bleeding, causing her to lose consciousness. The doctors, busy trying to stabilize her, feared she would not survive the crisis. It was during this time, as her physical body struggled to cling to life, that Anna found herself floating in a realm that seemed so far removed from the pain and chaos of the delivery room. During one of her interviews, she said, "In this otherworldly place, she was enveloped in a soft, gentle pink light. The light wasn't harsh or blinding, but rather comforting and warm, almost like a soothing embrace." Anna couldn't explain it at first, but she felt safe and serene, as though time itself had paused and all of her worldly concerns had dissipated. Then, through the soft haze of light, Anna saw a figure emerge, a woman who looked familiar, but not quite the way Anna remembered her. It was her mother. Anna's mother had passed away when Anna was just 19 years old after a long battle with breast cancer. Over the years, Anna had learned to cope with the loss, but it had always been a painful wound she carried with her, never fully healed. As her mother approached, Anna felt a wave of emotions rush over her. Love, longing, sadness, but above all, a profound sense of peace. Her mother did not speak a word. In fact, there was no need for words. Anna could feel everything in that moment. The weight of her mother's forgiveness for any past misunderstandings, the immense pride she had for Anna and her accomplishments, and an unspoken message of strength and reassurance. It was as if Anna's entire life, with all its struggles, joys, and heartaches, had been understood and embraced in that brief, transcendent moment. Anna's mother reached out and, with a tenderness she had not experienced since childhood, gently touched Anna's cheek. It wasn't just a touch, it was a profound connection that spoke directly to Anna's soul. The love she felt was unlike anything she had ever known, a pure, unconditional love that transcended time and space. In that quiet exchange, Anna said she felt that all her pain, her fears about becoming a mother, her grief over her mother's death, all of it was validated and forgiven. The forgiveness was mutual, and the pride Anna felt was overwhelming. Her mother's spirit seemed to envelop her, offering protection and strength, a strength Anna didn't realize she needed until that very moment. When Anna finally awoke in the hospital, her recovery was nothing short of miraculous. The doctors, astonished by how stable she was despite the severity of her condition, remarked that she was incredibly fortunate. Anna, however, believed differently. She believed that her mother had come to her aid, not only as a comforting presence, but as her savior in that critical moment when she was at death's door. The doctors couldn't explain it, but Anna knew in her heart that her mother's spirit had intervened. She had felt her presence so strongly and knew that the love and guidance her mother had provided were part of what saved her life. Anna believed that her mother had touched her in more ways than one, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. That moment, she would later say, was the most peaceful she had ever experienced, and it gave her a renewed sense of purpose and connection to her own life, her family, and the child she was about to bring into the world. Years later, she would reflect on that experience often. She knew she had been given a rare gift, a glimpse into a world beyond our understanding, and a chance to reconnect with someone she had lost. That moment in the soft pink light had not only saved her life, but had helped her heal in ways she never thought possible. Anna now believes that love, even after death, can transcend all boundaries, and that her mother's touch in that moment was not just a sign of her love, but a reminder that we are never truly alone, even in our darkest times. Story 8. She Told Me the Secret. Terrence, a 50-year-old man from rural Georgia, had a massive heart attack. In the moments he was clinically dead, he said he found himself sitting on a porch swing beside his mother, the same swing they used to sit on together when he was a child. He says she told him, "The secret to this life is simple. Love like you'll never get another chance." At 50 years old, Terrence was living a life full of responsibilities, struggles, and routine. But everything changed in an instant when he suffered a massive heart attack. He was clinically dead for a short time, his heart stopped, and his body was unresponsive. But in those moments of darkness, when his body was failing, Terrence found himself somewhere else, sitting on a familiar porch swing beside his mother. The swing was one of the few things from his childhood that he truly cherished. It was on that same swing that he and his mother used to sit together, enjoying the simple beauty of the Georgia countryside, talking about life and the world around them. Those moments were some of the happiest memories of his youth, and now they had come to him in a way he could never have anticipated. His mother, who had passed away many years before, appeared beside him, and Terrence noticed something strange. She looked younger, vibrant, and full of life, as if time had reversed for her. There was no sign of illness or aging, just the pure, calm presence of the woman he loved. Her smile was warm and comforting, and as they sat together in the quiet of that moment, she spoke to him. Those words, simple yet profound, struck Terrence deeply. In that brief encounter, he felt a calm that he had never known in his life. The weight of the world, his stresses, his regrets, and his doubts all seemed to melt away in the presence of his mother. Her message was clear and powerful. Love is the key. It wasn't about wealth, success, or achievements. It was about loving fully, with every ounce of your being, as if there would never be another opportunity to do so. As quickly as it had begun, the moment ended. Terrence awoke in the hospital, surrounded by doctors and nurses, and was told that his heart attack had been severe. Yet, against all odds, he had pulled through, stable and conscious. But something inside of him had shifted. He realized that the encounter with his mother, that peaceful, profound moment on the porch swing, had changed him forever. Terrence went on to make significant changes in his life after that experience. He began to live with a new perspective, one rooted in love and presence. He reached out to family members he had grown distant from, mended relationships that had long been fractured, and started embracing every moment with a new sense of purpose. Every decision he made was guided by that simple but powerful secret his mother had shared with him. And it didn't end there. Whenever Terence faced moments of doubt or uncertainty, whenever he was tempted to fall back into old patterns of fear or hesitation, he could still hear his mother's voice, clear and comforting. Her words echoed in his mind, reminding him to love fully, without holding back, and to live with the urgency of knowing that each moment could be your last chance to love with all your heart. As the years went on, Terence's life was marked by deeper connections, more meaningful relationships, and an unwavering commitment to living with love at the center of everything he did. The voice of his mother, a voice from beyond the grave, remained his guide, always reminding him that the secret to life was simple. Love like you'll never get another chance. Terence's story became a reminder to those around him that sometimes the most important lessons in life don't come from the living, but from the spirits of those who have passed on, who offer us wisdom in our darkest moments. In his case, his mother's love reached across time and space, giving him not only a second chance at life, but a second chance at love. And that, in the end, was all that truly mattered. Story 9. A nurse's testimony. Joanna, a hospice nurse of 18 years, recalls a patient named Miss Dolores, 88, who had dementia and hadn't spoken clearly in weeks. Just hours before she passed, she suddenly looked up, smiled brightly, and said, "Mama, you came." Then she sat up, arms open, and whispered, "I'm ready now." Joanna, a dedicated hospice nurse with 18 years of experience, had witnessed many patients pass away. But the story of Miss Dolores, an 88-year-old woman suffering from dementia, stayed with her for a long time. Miss Dolores had been unresponsive for weeks, her words often incoherent, her mind clouded by the ravages of her illness. Her family had been preparing for the inevitable, and Joanna was there, offering the usual care and compassion that comes with the role of a hospice nurse. But on the day Miss Dolores passed, something remarkable happened. Just hours before she took her final breath, Miss Dolores suddenly lifted her head and looked up, a bright smile spreading across her face. It was as if something, or someone, had captured her attention. Joanna, standing by her side, could only watch in awe as Miss Dolores, with clarity and recognition, uttered a single word, "Mama, you came." Joanna was struck by the sudden, unexpected clarity in Miss Dolores's voice. Her mother, who had passed away many years ago, was now present in some way, or at least that's how it seemed to Joanna. But what followed was even more extraordinary. With an open, welcoming gesture, Miss Dolores slowly sat up, arms stretched out in an embrace, as if she were reaching towards someone unseen. And then, in a whisper barely audible, she said, "I'm ready now." At that moment, a chill ran through Joanna. It was a feeling she couldn't quite explain, a profound sense that something beyond the physical realm was at play. It wasn't just a passing moment of confusion or delirium. There was a recognition in Miss Dolores's eyes, a peace that was unmistakable. It was as if she had seen someone, her mother, perhaps, or some other figure from the past, and had finally found the peace she needed to let go. Joanna had witnessed many moments in her career, but this one was different. It was as if Miss Dolores had been waiting for something, or someone, to guide her to the other side. And in that moment, it was clear that whatever had appeared to Miss Dolores had brought her the peace she needed. After whispering that she was ready, Miss Dolores relaxed and, within hours, passed away peacefully in her sleep. Joanna, who had spent years working with terminally ill patients, knew that what she had just witnessed was not an isolated incident. She had seen similar moments time and time again, as patients near the end of their lives spoke to loved ones who had passed, often seeming to see and interact with them in ways the living could not. These encounters, as strange as they seemed, brought an undeniable peace to the patients, often allowing them to let go of their earthly concerns and pass on with a sense of calm. Joanna reflected on the countless patients she had cared for over the years, many of whom spoke of seeing mothers, fathers, siblings, or even children who had gone before them. These experiences, she said, were more common than people might think, though they often go unnoticed or are dismissed as hallucinations. Yet, for those who witnessed these moments, the peace that followed was impossible to deny. I've watched dozens of people speak to mothers, fathers, even children before they pass, Joanna said. And the peace it brings is undeniable. It was as though the presence of loved ones, seen or unseen, helped guide these souls to their final rest, offering comfort and reassurance in their final moments. The quiet, tender moments when patients communicated with the departed were often the ones that left the deepest impression on Joanna. She believed they spoke to something beyond our understanding, a connection between the living and the dead that transcended the boundaries of time and space. For Joanna, these experiences reinforced her belief in something greater than the physical world. She had seen it firsthand, the comfort that these encounters brought to her patients, the way they seemed to relax and let go when they saw loved ones come to greet them. It was a gift in her eyes that gave people the opportunity to pass peacefully, knowing they were not truly alone. Miss Dolores' story was just one of many that Joanna had witnessed over the years, but it remained a reminder of the mysterious ways in which the human spirit connects, even in death. As a nurse, Joanna had always felt a deep responsibility to care for her patients, but these moments of connection were what truly deepened her understanding of the work she did. They were proof in her heart that love and the bonds we form with others do not end with death, they transcend it. Story 10, she told me to keep going. David, a man in his early 40s who attempted to take his own life, was clinically dead for several minutes after being found unresponsive. When he was revived, he told the hospital chaplain that he had been surrounded by darkness and shame, until his mother appeared in front of him, glowing with soft light. She forgave me instantly, he said. She said, "You've been carrying this pain alone for too long, but you were never alone. Keep going, son. It gets better." In his early 40s, David found himself in a dark place. He struggled with intense feelings of shame, isolation, and despair, which eventually led him to attempt to take his own life. He felt like he had reached the end of the road, burdened by emotional pain he couldn't seem to escape. But after being found unresponsive and clinically dead for several minutes, David was revived. When he came back to life, he wasn't alone. The experience he had during those moments in the darkness, before he was brought back to life, would change him forever. He described being surrounded by a vast, overwhelming darkness. It felt suffocating, filled with all the shame, guilt, and hopelessness that had plagued him for so long. He was completely alone, he thought, with no escape from the weight of his emotions. But in the midst of that darkness, something miraculous happened. His mother appeared. She didn't appear as he remembered her in the physical world, but instead she glowed with a soft, comforting light. The radiance she emitted was calming and peaceful, and David felt an overwhelming sense of warmth and love, a stark contrast to the despair he had been drowning in. His mother, who had passed away many years before, stood in front of him, her presence more real and tangible than anything he had ever felt in his life. Without any words, she forgave him instantly. David was flooded with a wave of compassion, understanding, and peace, emotions he had never experienced in the same way before. Then, in a gentle, clear voice, his mother spoke to him. "You've been carrying this pain alone for too long, but you were never alone. Keep going, son. It gets better." Her words, though simple, pierced through the darkness that had overwhelmed him for so long. For the first time, he felt released from the weight of his shame and the burden of feeling like he wasn't worthy of love or forgiveness. His mother's forgiveness was unconditional, and her message, to keep going, that things would get better, was a lifeline he never expected to receive. David was brought back to the physical world. His body revived, but he was not the same. The experience had transformed him in ways he couldn't fully explain. Over the course of the following year, he committed himself to recovery, seeking therapy and support, and slowly working through the trauma and pain that had led him to that dark moment. Yet it was his mother's words that stayed with him every step of the way. "I didn't come back alone," David later said, reflecting on his experience. "I brought her words with me." Those words, spoken in the darkest moment of his life, gave him the strength to push through the darkest days of recovery. Whenever he felt hopeless, whenever he doubted himself, he would hear her voice in his mind, urging him to keep going, reminding him that he wasn't alone, that things could get better. As the years went by, David began to speak publicly about his struggles with mental health and his near-death experience. He shared his story in the hope that it would help others who felt as alone as he once did. He spoke about how his mother's presence and her message had been the turning point for him. A moment when he felt truly seen, heard, and loved. David's story became a beacon of hope for others, a reminder that even in the most hopeless of moments, there can be a flicker of light. He believed his near-death experience had been a gift, one that showed him that love and forgiveness could transcend death, and that no matter how dark things may seem, there is always a chance for healing and redemption. In sharing his journey, David made sure to emphasize the power of seeking help, reaching out to others, and not facing pain alone. His mother's words, "Keep going, son, it gets better," had not only saved his life, but had also given him the courage to live it more fully. Each of these stories may be different in detail, but the heart of them remains the same. A love so deep, so eternal, that even death cannot end it. Whether you believe these experiences are spiritual visions, divine interventions, or memories from another realm, there's one thing they all prove: a mother's love never dies. If this video touched you, share it with someone who needs hope right now. Tell us in the comments, have you ever had a similar experience or known someone who has? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a real NDE story again. We're here to tell the stories that live beyond the veil. Thank you.